Hello, our truth warriors, and welcome back to the Atlantic Underground podcast. Now, I do like to talk to experts around the world, and today's guest was the first woman ever accepted into the University of Florida as a clinical gastroenterology fellow. She's a pioneer in a field. The work that she's been doing about our microbiome is an absolute amazing breakthrough. And today, we're going to get a better understanding of how we work ourselves. So it's an absolute pleasure to have with me Dr. Sabine Hazan. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
No, it's great, and really looking forward to our chat today. Could we start off by explaining to us and the people that are watching what the work is that you do and what it's about?
Well, in short, I take stool samples of humans with different, you know, from different races, from different genders, from different um, areas of the world. And I analyze their microbiome. Their microbiome is essentially their poop,
Yeah,
which is full of microbes. And so I analyze the microbes to give me an idea of what's going on in them that could explain possibly their diseases or what's going on with them.
yeah. So it's quite key and important because, sometimes just a diagnosis from a general practitioner isn't normally the best way to go about things. We do need to get a little bit more in depth with this kind of thing. You also co-wrote a book, and the title's fantastic. It's called "Let's Talk Shit," which most people think that I do on the show a lot. But as amusing as the title is, this is quite an educational book. What kind of information would people get from that? Should they get this book?
So this is an easy book to understand the microbiome, essentially. It's an easy introduction. It's not too scientific, although we do quote a lot of data in there
Yeah,
to justify, right, why we are saying what we're saying. But it's meant to be basically for the person that's essentially wants to understand the science behind the microbiome, wants to learn about gut health, wants to have little tricks on how to improve your gut without really going too deep into it. It's really an introduction. It's also an introduction about where antibiotics came from, how did we come to think about, using fecal material in pharmaceutical companies, poop pill. Now you saw the poop capsule
yeah,
was approved by the FDA. So it's really, as we're heading in a world of, poop pills, as I like to call them, Dr. Barodi calls them the crapsule. As we get into that world, I feel the public needs to understand what it's about
yeah,
so they can make a better informed consent on taking those pills or not.
yeah. And I can imagine a lot of people knowing what the pills are sometimes a little bit apprehensive on taking those.
Correct.
Now, I did notice today, Twitter. You put a quite an important post out today. It's amazing we still call it Twitter. They changed the name to X, but everyone still calls it Twitter. But
Yeah.
could you tell us about that? This is quite an important bit of information that we'd like to get out today.
I think we've all, everybody's talking about misinformation, but this was really news, a local news that basically blasted about this kid dying. And it was kind of shocking because I knew the family, and they didn't approach me or talk to me about it, but someone told me they're doing, GoFundMe, etc.
Yeah,
And it was a health provider who during COVID essentially was exposed, volunteered in New York and was exposed to COVID, never got COVID, and then he got forced to get vaccinated, got 4 or 5 vaccines, and then basically had COVID, finally got COVID. And it started with a nose, sinus, etc. And he basically went to the emergency room, got got prednisone, and an hour after taking the prednisone, he died.
Yeah.
So, and they put died from COVID. And to me, it was I raised the point here because, and I raised it on X because I said, how is that died from COVID? I mean, because is it COVID or is it the fact that you remember I did the studies on the vaccines affecting the microbiome, right? We took samples of, physicians that were about to get vaccinated, so we had a baseline, so we had a before and after. So we gave them before and after, and we tested their microbiome before and after, and we noticed this important microbe, bifidobacteria, dropped to zero after the vaccine, about a month after the vaccine. But also, it persisted in dropping. So in other words, somebody starts off at 1 million, drops to like 500,000, but then 6 to 9 months later drops to zero. So here's my thought process. When I hear of someone catching COVID after 5 vaccines, I say to myself, I wonder if it killed the bifidobacteria by the first shot. The second shot, you kill a little bit more. Third shot, the second shot is still working on killing the microbiome. And then third shot, you keep killing more and more until you end up killing everything. And now you have zero bifidobacteria in your gut.
Yeah.
And that's the beginning of leaky gut, right? Which is the importance of leaky gut where viruses penetrate, right? Because you no longer have that protection. Remember, bifidobacteria, that trillion-dollar industry of probiotics, was created because they noticed that newborns are born with a lot of bifidobacteria and old people die with zero bifidobacteria. So the process of aging is really loss of bifidobacteria, which is what the whole industry of probiotics is all about. It's bifidobacteria. Of course, now they're coming out with more microbes, right? As if those are the good microbes, right? You've seen Akkermansia probiotic, Bacillus subtilis probiotic, Lactobacillus probiotic, right? The first microbe that we see in newborns is bifidobacteria. You want to hold on as much as possible to your bifidobacteria. So the fact that the vaccine kills that, you wonder if people catch COVID because of the fact that they are immunosuppressed in essence. We've made them immunosuppressed. And here's the thing, vaccines are great, I guess, for the immunosuppressed, right? You have no immunity, you're out there, you need to be protected. So you need a shot to be protected, but you have no immunity to begin with.
Yeah.
They're not so great in people that have a good immunity, because then it puts you into that, and we're seeing it now with COVID, right? It puts you into that world of immunosuppression. Yeah. And so how do you build the bifidobacteria? It's very difficult. It's not a probiotic. It's not a pill. So this is essentially, this is the work that I do. This is what I want people to start understanding. And, we need to start dividing the world into two populations, the immunosuppressed and the immunocompetent, right? The ones that are stronger immunity, because ultimately we're going to need what those people that have a strong immunity have to fix the other people, right? I mean, when we look at how do we treat hepatitis C, how do we treat all these, viruses, etc., it's always about what do we learn from the strong to use to fix the weak.
Yeah. So
yeah, that's my work in essence.
Excellent. Now, is the gut far more important than people actually realize?
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm starting to see it. I mean, I haven't published everything and we're way behind on our publications. Primarily because we're being censored. I'm being censored. So I can't publish the next data if I don't publish the first data, and I always tell people, I couldn't publish the lost microbes of COVID without publishing COVID was in the stools, right? Because science is a story. It's a story of how you got there. How did you figure this out, right? So you have to kind of show the pattern of all your experiments to say, well, I started with finding COVID in the stools. And then I started looking at what is different in COVID patients to non-COVID to patients that never got COVID, right?
Yeah.
And then I start looking and discovering, well, bifidobacteria is the bacteria that's different, right? The presence of bifidobacteria in those that never got COVID versus the absence of bifidobacteria in those that basically got COVID and severe COVID. So when you look at that, you go, okay, well, this is one thing, right? One research, right? Now your mind goes to, how do I increase bifidobacteria and what kills bifidobacteria? So then you start doing other experiments, right? You realize spontaneously, which is what happened to me, is I gave myself vitamin C and realized vitamin C increases the bifidobacteria. I gave myself ivermectin, realized ivermectin increased my bifidobacteria. Let me see what it does in 20 people. Let me see what vitamin C does in 20 people or 30 people. And then, taking other medications and seeing what kills the BIF, what increases the BIF, even nutrients, even foods, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's how you learn. You don't change anything in your diet, but you change one thing, and then you see what happened, right? So that's how discovery is made. So you cannot write loss of microbes when you've not written finding COVID in the stools. You cannot write vitamin C increases bifidobacteria till you've introduced the person reading the research to bifidobacteria and the importance of bifidobacteria and the differences between bifidobacteria in severe COVID versus no COVID and exposed.
Yeah. And speaking about food and things that we eat, one of the big pushes now from the beautiful people at the World Economic Forum and other areas is to start processing bugs. And there's something within these bugs, which I believe is possibly in the hard casing of the shell of the body, called, is it chitin or chitin or something like that? But, I'm being told that the gut cannot process this. Is this going to be a big problem if they continue to push this out as a food for people?
I think, it's interesting because we've gone so to the other level. I'm reminded of a musical when I was a kid, Oliver.
Yeah.
Remember Oliver? He was getting that liquid kind of yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
He was getting that and then all the kids had no energy. And then as soon as they got meat, they were like so energized.
Yeah.
What do you learn from that? Humanity, we are carnivore. We're basically, our diet is meant to be carnivore. Carnivore or carnivorous. I'm French is my background, so I'm always thinking in French.
Yeah.
But so in French it's carnivore. So so our diet, is meant to be animal products, right? If you look at the difference, but yet within humanity, there are some people that are not supposed to eat meat. They're supposed to eat vegetables, vegan, right? And so you kind of have to go back to your background, to your, your family, where you came from. You look at, I have, a tech in my GI center who basically is completely vegan, completely, super healthy guy. Yeah. But his family has always been vegan. He comes from, an area where everybody was vegan. So his microbiome has adapted to the vegan world. Yeah. So for this guy, this is perfect, right? But then you look at other people that, are in the center of Africa that are eating a zebra cold turkey, like they cut it, they eat it raw, they touch the blood, they they touch their family members with blood, then they go and eat the honey from the trees. So you look at these people and you go, well, they've adapted to that diet, right? And even when you look at, so I think as humans, we tend to have a different microbiome for a specific diet. That's what I think.
Yeah,
You know, Mediterranean diet is great for Mediterranean, Indian diet for, people from India, Mexican diet for people from Mexico. Like I'll go to Mexico and I eat their corn tortilla and all their foods, and I'm bloated and I can't tolerate it. I eat lima beans and forget me for like a week. So, what does that tell you? That tells you we all have our own specific diet, but then you give me Greek yogurt, you give me, tzatziki, you give me, my Mediterranean food, and
yeah,
my body loves that and is perfectly fine, right? Because that's what I grew up with. That's what, like I did 23andMe, so I have like 1/3 Greek in me, 1/3 Italian, 1/3 everything. So
yeah,
I'm a child from planet Earth, but I don't have, there's no Chinese, Japanese, Mexico in me. So probably those, and in fact, those are the diets that really, for me, I don't really tolerate.
yeah,
So I think the idea of putting humanity as a whole to have one diet and everybody should be vegan or everybody should be eating fake beef or everybody should be carnivore, it's wrong. It's I think we need to be specific, we need to be specialized too.
yeah,
And because our diversity is what creates humanity, right? The fact that you are from an area and I'm from an area and our microbiome is going back to the dirt and to the earth, it creates an overall diversity for the planet, but not necessarily something that I'm capable of ingesting or not because it's not from my location. So, in essence, that's the work I'm doing. If you look even at the animals, and I went to Zimbabwe and started collecting stools from the giraffe and the elephants and the lion, and you'll notice like the lion poop is mostly blood, and the elephant is this big ball. And if you break it out, you'll see bugs in there. So yeah, for the elephant, the bugs are probably perfect. He's got the stomach for it. He's got the bowels. I mean, the elephant is eating dirt and he's eating ticks and he's eating herbs, and the purpose of that dung of the elephant is really to repopulate the trees, right? Because with that dirt, with those ticks, with those bugs, he also ingests seeds. So those seeds are like wrapped in this beautiful ball of dung, which is essentially your fertilizer, right?
yeah,
It's like poop, right? It's like dirt. And then rain comes on and that dung gets broken down, and now a plant grows out of it and a tree grows out of it. So I think we have to start thinking that we are part of the circle of life, right? I said, because turkey, I cooked a turkey and posted it on X at some point and during Thanksgiving, and I said, I'm sorry if I'm shocking or upsetting the people that are vegan on this, but unfortunately, it is the circle of life.
yeah,
I eat the turkey that ate the dirt, that ate the grains, and those microbes are allowing me to function until my days when I am no longer of this planet and my microbes take over my body, put me back into the earth and allows the fruits and the grains to grow to feed the turkey. It's a circle, right? It's a circle of life. So, to stop that circle and say, oh, I'm sorry, you humans that are that we're supposed to eat all the foods, now you have to go eat the same thing as the elephant. Well, that doesn't make sense because maybe my microbiome is what helps feed the planet for plants to grow and for fruits to grow, etc.
yeah,
So I think in essence, we have to respect the circle of life.
yeah, absolutely. Now, it is thought that our gut is such an incredible organ that it has the ability to think and react like a brain. Is this true?
I think so. We haven't really discovered too much about the gut. Nobody really, has ventured. I mean, we've definitely, as gastroenterologists, we're looking at the gut with, is there polyps? Are there diverticular disease? Are diverticuli pockets in the colon? Are there tumors, colon cancer? Blood vessels that are popping. Those are really the limitations of are looking. Is there inflammation? Is there Crohn's? Is there ulcerative colitis? Those are our limitations. We've not really looked at what is the poop, right? This is the first, I would say the last decade has been, hey, let's look at the poop. Why are we just focusing on the colonic mucosa? Let's look at the poop. But I have a feeling that once we start discovering more about the microbes and in the microbiome, in the gut, we're going to go back to the colonic mucosa and we're going to start thinking about the receptors in the colonic mucosa, the rejection of certain microbes in the colonic mucosa. What makes it that certain microbes are okay in the colon and certain are not? So I think that's really, what the future holds. We're going to be exploring. We know the blood. We have a hemoglobin to test the blood. We have a CBC. We have platelets. We could test whether you're bleeding or not. If you don't stop bleeding, we have platelets. We do not have a good immunity marker. And part of we have immunity markers in the blood, right? Your immunoglobulins, your CD4 count, etc.
Yeah.
But we don't really have an immune marker in the gut. And so I think bifidobacteria is going to probably be the beginning. It's going to be the hemoglobin of a GI bleeder. When we have a GI bleeder and they are bleeding, we don't know what their hemoglobin is. If their hemoglobin is less than 10, is less than 7, they need a blood transfusion, right? If it's more than 7, they don't, we just observe. So it's the same thing. At some point, we're going to start paying attention to the bifidobacteria. And we're going to start saying, you know what, this patient is lacking bifidobacteria with certainty, not just looking at the surface of the microbiome, but at the depth of the microbiome. And then saying, you know what, this is what we need. This person needs probiotics or an infusion of probiotics. Sorry, I had a late night last night with a patient, so I'm still, I juggle so much, it's like hard to keep up with my own schedule.
It's all good. It's all good. Now, people talk about the gut instinct, that it's really something that many people overlook and could pay more attention to. Do you think this is the way forward for people? They pay more attention to the mind than they do the gut. Can this help people understand themselves better if they do start to focus upon this?
Yeah, I think so. I think focusing on the gut certainly helped me during the pandemic. I mean, I started paying more attention to what I was eating. I was testing my bifidobacteria the whole pandemic to see what was killing it, what was increasing it. It's amazing the foods that you discover along the way that are, not so good for your bifidobacteria.
Yeah.
I killed my bifidobacteria without saying right now what I killed it with because I'm publishing it. But I killed my bifidobacteria and it was very difficult to grow back.
Yeah.
And it was a learning lesson of how fragile it is and how long it took. It took me 1.5 years to get back my original fingerprint of my microbiome.
Wow.
So once you demolish your microbiome, it takes a long time to grow it back. And I give the example of a house where you basically, the foundation starts breaking down and then the house crumbles.
Yeah.
You need to rebuild that foundation before rebuilding the house. And if you build the foundation on sand, it's not going to really hold the house. So, if your mucosa is damaged, if there's some inflammation there, it's not going to really grow microbes. So you got to heal the inflammation. You got to heal the microbiome. It is not simple. And this is why I'm kind of, I'm speaking at the Senate on Monday. Hopefully there's not going to be a crisis that's not going to allow me to get there. But I'm speaking there mainly to talk about the interference of research because and how, the research of the vaccines affect the microbiome. 2 years ago, we published that and presented at the American College of Gastro,
Yeah.
and it's still yet to be published. We did that study, I mean, at the beginning of the pandemic, right? I mean, when the vaccines first rolled out, my colleagues were still at home in quarantine. So we were collecting stools right before they went into the front line. So, when that research was done back then in the 20s, and then we're in 2024 and it's still not published, there's a problem.
Absolutely. Now, let's talk about bacteria, fungus, and viruses. Now, are they separate things from a human being, or are they part of us biologically? And how much of the human body is actually made up of this?
Well, I would say the majority of the body is made of bacteria, viruses, fungi, parasites. It's all living in there. Majority is bacteria. You want to have in your gut mostly bacteria, but there is a virome in your gut, which are multiple viruses. Think about it. It's like taking a container and you put these big tennis balls in there, and then that's your bacteria, and then you fill the container with like sand, and that fills all the hole, and that's your virus, and then you add water, and then that fills that other space that the sand didn't reach. So it's like basically that's what your microbiome is all about. It's space in your colon, but the majority is bacteria, and then viruses tend to penetrate. You're eating sushi, you're probably having some parasites in the fish, you're eating raw fish, there's parasites in the raw fish. So don't freak out too much if you've got those, because that's part of your microbiome. They get evacuated, they don't get absorbed. So because I know people are always call me and say, oh my god, I have got parasites and I need to kill. No, just because you see it in the fish, you're eating it, it's in your gut, your body is meant to just clean that out. Obviously, if you've got parasites that you're seeing, you're symptomatic, you're having, change in your blood, at that point you need to consult a physician and get rid of those parasites.
Yeah.
But seeing here and there a little, some little parasites in there is not, can be part of your normal microbiome. And sometimes the majority of patients think that it's parasite and really it's fiber.
Yeah.
So, so what else is in your poop? Your prebiotic, your fiber, your vegetables, so that's what's in your poop. That's what's, and then blood vessels, colonic mucosa, colonic cells, all the waste of the human body that's shedding is in your poop and here to go out. So, and I'll even say the microbiome is fascinating, because every different areas has a different balance of microbes. Your eye has microbes, your nose, your mouth, your skin has tons of microbes, your belly, your lungs, so, and how beautiful that the human being. And here's the thing, right? You've got a urinary tract infections. What we've noticed in patients with urinary tract infections is that they tend to have the same bacteria that they have in their urine in their colon.
Right.
So you wonder if there's that leaky gut where that bacteria from the bladder goes to the colon, right? So, but in general, what we notice is that there should be, in a healthy individual, balance of these microbes all around us, to kind of create a health.
Yeah. So, the gastrointestinal disorders contribute to the other diseases within the body. And there are a lot of these illnesses that are being treated with modern day pharmaceuticals being misdiagnosed by general practitioners and just being given, general pharmaceutical drugs to try and maybe ease the symptoms of it, rather than going to the actual source of the problem and coming up with the cure.
Pharmaceutical companies want what makes them the most money, right? So they want a band-aid. They don't necessarily want a cure.
Yeah.
I think, it was a big awakening for me, COVID, because it was a realization that no, they don't want cures. They want to keep pushing a $10,000 drug per month because it's, regenerating money.
Yeah.
So what can I tell you?
Yeah. And I imagine a lot
It's
of
what it is. The price of the stock is more important than human life, it seems.
yeah, and I've met people and been to people's houses over the years, and they may be on 20 different medications from the doctor, which seems to be a knock-on effect from one to the other, from where the side effects of one triggers something else. But can these modern pharmaceuticals and therapies also disrupt the gut and then cause further illness within people?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, there will be a time at some point where, microbiome testing is going to be part of clinical trials.
Yeah.
It's going to have to be. You cannot do safety trials without looking at the microbiome, especially since we have the technology now.
Yeah.
If a drug, listen, and here's the thing, we need pharmaceutical drugs, right? I mean, it's not like I'm killing the whole industry. We need pharmaceutical drugs. You have strep pneumonia, you need, that antibiotic.
Yeah.
The key is, don't want to kill everything. You got to put back good microbes that you've killed along the way. So while you're testing the patient on that antibiotic, it would be good to know how long till the antibiotic grows back your microbiome, or do you need to supplement it to avoid getting into this pattern of, immunosuppression in a way.
Yeah.
And recurrent infections. Because if you're having a pneumonia in your 20s, what are you looking at in the 40s, right? It's just the beginning that's telling you, wait a minute, you're immunosuppressed. You got to pay attention. You've overdone it.
As your studies in regards to these microbiomes in the gut being affected by the modern day mRNA vaccines, have you actually done any studies on people who are pregnant or breastfeeding to find
Yeah,
out?
we are. Nothing that I can really talk. I mean, I talked briefly on one of the podcasts or news channel that I've done. Well, we noticed a couple moms that were breastfeeding, their babies were born with zero bifidobacteria.
Yeah.
We need more patients. We need to see more data. We need to see if this is just an isolated case, if it's just isolated cases, or if there are more. I can tell you, I'm looking to those moms, definitely. I'm looking for those moms to test their microbiome because we need to know.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the past few years, obviously, there's been a lot of measures in that have been frowned upon that didn't seem to be particularly right for people. One of those things was the majority of people being forced to wear masks for most of the day, and rebreathing that bacteria in and out that is
Well,
meant to be expelled.
yeah, and by the way, the case that I mentioned on Twitter today, on X, one wonders if that's the case, right? The guy is wearing a mask, he's putting it in his pocket, he's leaving it on the counter of the hospital, he's bringing it back, it's in the car, and then he wears it back again. These masks are extremely filthy.
Yeah.
If you culture these masks, there's tons of microbes in there alone that you're continuously breathing in and out, and eventually they're going to implant your nose and mess up the microbiome of your nose, right? So, yeah, I mean, to me, that was ridiculous. But listen, if it gives people comfort and decreases the anxiety, I'm all for that. You know what I mean? It's like, I'm all for for the freedom to make a choice. If you feel like, hey, I can't go outside because I'm scared of viruses, I'd rather put a mask on, your choice.
Yeah.
If you feel like, you know what, I'm perfectly fine, I've done everything right, gut health is good, I'm good. Yes, I don't need a mask. I don't want to risk infecting myself with other bugs. Yeah, you're good.
Yeah.
freedom of choice.
Absolutely. Now, we mentioned a little bit earlier about the use of ivermectin. A lot of people are using this as a regime, parasite cleansing now as well. Is this a good thing to do, or can it actually kill off more than we want to in the body?
Um, I think anytime you take drugs, just to take drugs because you think you've got a parasite, because you think you've got some infection that you haven't really tested, it's a mistake.
Yeah.
The whole, and look, this is where doctors and the art of medicine is practiced, right? Certain doctors will want their patients to be on those drugs and they feel comfortable on those drugs, right? I mean, the safety margin, the safety profile of ivermectin is very safe.
Yeah.
We give it to babies with scabies. I have no problems with it. However, what is it doing long term to the microbiome is the big question. We saw what it did short term. Short term, it increased the bifidobacteria within 24 hours. But what is it doing long term to the microbiome? Is that, helpful or not? Is it continuing to increase the bifidobacteria or is it killing it?
Yeah.
Remember, ivermectin is 24 hours. So is it increasing the bifidobacteria, then going back down again and back up and back down? And that's kind of a yo-yo effect. That's turbulence in your gut. So I'm only for ivermectin if you need it. And what does that mean, needing it? Well, you discover you've got some parasite and you've seen the parasites, right? You discover you've got, COVID, right? I mean, we've definitely, I don't care what the data shows, that's, you know, um, paid by the Gates Foundation. I care about what I've witnessed on the front line. And, I'm the one that published, ivermectin given as a combination drug for triple therapy for COVID.
Yeah.
So to me, we need to pay attention to that. And that has saved hypoxic patients. We had a lot of patients on the study and they improved with ivermectin, doxycycline, zinc, vitamin C, and D. I think you should only use, in my opinion, drugs when you need it.
Yeah.
So if you don't need it, stay away from it. Because here's the other thing: you become resistant to that drug. It's like painkillers. You take a painkiller the first day, and then the next day you have pain. You take another pain, but you're increasing it to 2 or 3 or 4. And then eventually that painkiller doesn't work anymore. You need something stronger and then something stronger and stronger until the next painkiller kills you. So in essence, try to avoid as much as possible and build up your gut immunity, build up that strength, build up that resilience. I don't think we talk about resilience enough in medicine. I don't think we talk about strengthening ourselves, right? Think about when you go to the gym, what are you doing? You're bodybuilding to strengthen yourself, to increase your muscle mass, right?
Yeah.
That's why wouldn't we think it's the same thing for your immunity? To be exposed to microbes. We've all gotten sick. We've all had a virus here and there when we were kids. And do you notice, like, when you survive the virus, you're like so much stronger, so much like, oh my God, I survived this virus. I was in bed for like a week, but wow, I'm like, jogging and I'm back up and around, right? So I think ultimately, our ability to survive these bugs, our ability to develop a resilience to warrior up is really what we need to be. But is that what those that want to control us want us to be? I don't think so. And this is why they probably want to feed you bugs and just be controlled and given vaccines every 3 months.
Oh, yeah. Well, if you keep people sick, there's always a lot of profits in it for them as well.
Well, profits, but also, nobody can rebel. Nobody can kind of go against them.
Yeah, compliance, absolutely. And one of the things that was a big push again over the past few years, which I refused to do, everywhere we went, everyone was trying to force people to use these antibacterial gels and rub them all over the hands. you know, I was well aware from people that I knew at the time that this was bad for people. It was killing off the good bacteria that we needed to have. But not only that, once this actually soaked into the skin and got into the bloodstreams, it was causing absolute massive problems elsewhere. And I do believe that it was very possible that all this sanitizing gel that was being forced upon people could have made a lot of people sick.
Yeah, I mean that you can live in a sterile environment and be completely clean and put gel and everything in your hands, and you essentially clean and sterilize your gut because, like you said, the hands goes to the blood vessels travel,
Yeah.
go to the bowels, and you kill off a bunch of microbes in the gut. So, all that, but you'd have to do it a lot. And there's a lot of, people that are working in the hospital. It's like every 5 minutes, they're like, spraying with that gel, which is disgusting. And then you're putting in your mouth, you're breathing, you're etc. So I think you could live in that environment, right? You could live, but here's the problem. Once you leave that environment, you're going to get sick because you were in an environment that was closed. You were living in a glass, container.
Yeah.
Once you leave the glass container to the world becomes toxic, right? Because now you're completely sterile and you're in a environment full of microbes that are just gonna like gravitate towards you, right? So you're gonna be exposed to the guy that's coughing. You're gonna be eating those nuts in New York City that are, full of microbes. Those little carts in New York City where they're listing the nuts and the chestnuts, and you're buying those full of microbes. I mean, we're talking about every human being that passes through them. The guy's shaking them and turning them and giving it. I mean, that's full of microbes. On top of that, the city itself, you're exposed to so many people. You're in the metro, you're in the bus, you're exposed to so many people. You go to a concert, you're exposed to so many people. I went to Sphere the other day, and I think there was something like, I mean, there were like thousands of people in the stadium, and we were stuck like sardines getting out. Yeah. I mean, I was exposed to everyone. If I didn't get sick then, I mean, like, gosh, my immunity is like really good. But here's a person that stayed home for like 6 months, and you bring them to the Sphere, for sure they're gonna get sick. And I have people that have been, throughout the pandemic, I've treated so many patients. One of the patients went to the Super Bowl, and he got sick. He got COVID right after the Super Bowl. And he's like, oh my God, I've been fine the whole pandemic. And then I go, yeah, well, that's what happens. You're from a clean, controlled environment, sterile, to going outside. So it's when you leave that comfort zone.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's very tough to do, that transition, right? So think about, I always ask myself, Steve Jobs died of pancreatic cancer, but really it was like a big pancreatic cyst at the beginning, right? And I always wonder, did he go from his sterile, clean environment where everything was meticulous to India, walking barefoot on the soil of India? And did he catch one of those parasites that goes through the foot to the skin and then stuck itself to the pancreas and caused a cyst? It is possible, right? So now the kid from India who's barefoot all the time is not going to have any issues with parasites because they live in that environment, right? Think about the guy who is, and I've seen the microbiome of the homeless, okay, and I've seen it during COVID. Think about the homeless guy that eats from a garbage can,
yeah,
and then doesn't catch COVID and doesn't get sick. Why is that? And they're sleeping in the worst environments. I mean, I've seen people, homeless people in California, sleep in the rain, in the cold, in the heat, and they are still resilient. So resiliency is something to aim for. I'm not saying go be a homeless and sleep outside, but I'm just saying little by little build up your immunity, because otherwise your time is short on the planet, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there any studies showing a connection between the the microbiome, the gut, and mental disorders?
So we just came out, we are presenting at the anxiety meeting in April in Boston. We're coming out with a signature microbiome for anxiety. And it was so funny because just today, so our stool testing is our part of a big clinical trial. So we have a genetic sequencing lab that found COVID in the stools. We found loss of bifidobacteria, but it's all part of research to kind of identify all these microbes, to see these signatures in autism and Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, etc.
Yeah.
My goal is essentially to look at the overall picture.
Yeah.
What does the Japanese and Japan microbiome look like compared to the Japanese in America, right? Why is the Japanese in America having celiac sprue and the Japanese in Japan doesn't have it, right? What changed in the diet?
Yeah.
Why is the person from Bulgaria that moved to America becomes all of a sudden arthritic? What changed in her microbiome that caused all that, right? So because it is a clinical trial, patients essentially enter and we categorize them according to their disease, right? So if they have, epidermolysis bullosa, for example, we put them in that category with that a clinical trial for that condition. If they have anxiety, we have a clinical trial. So for the anxiety clinical trial, one of the things we've been doing is actually overlooking all the patients that have, and we started about a year ago, we started putting a GAD questionnaire, which is an anxiety questionnaire, and we give it to all the patients because we want to see if we're right? We want to see, so the first 200 patients that we analyzed, because of the fact that, we were presenting at the anxiety, we wanted to have a poster and a presentation, we started noticing that actually there's a signature microbiome in anxious people that is not present in people that have zero anxiety from the questionnaire. So one of the funny things today was a patient that called and said, why do I have to fill in this questionnaire for Dr. Hazan? And one of the things is, well, look, she's like, I'm not anxious. And it's funny because it's always the people that think they're not anxious that are the most anxious. So, my manager was like, well, listen, this is part of her research. She wants to see if you've got this microbe. Just fill it in as much as you can. But this is essentially what we do, right? We look at different questionnaires per disease. We look at essentially the microbiome of those diseases and match with those questionnaires. So we can have a questionnaire that tells us, yes, your kid is autistic. Actually, we have 4 questionnaires for autism because just because the parent says the kid is autistic or another doctor, we don't necessarily trust it unless we do our own history, physical, and testing, right? So there's a CARS test, ATAC scores, etc. And then from there, we're able to see, okay, you know what? There is a microbiome problem that I see within the family. Like the kids that are neurotypical are perfectly fine, and the kid that's got dysbiosis is autistic, right? And that's where the process and the concept of fecal transplant came about, right? But more importantly, from fecal transplant, what came about was fecal transplant. Should it be a donor that's a stranger or should it be a donor from a family? Yeah. My thought, and that's probably where I differ, I always stand alone on an island doing my own thing. But I have to collaborate with most doctors. But here's the thing, my thing is if you've got a neurotypical kid that is in the same family and the kid doesn't have an abnormal microbiome and you have a kid that's autistic, well, maybe we should just swap one kid for another because at least it's in the same gene pool. Remember, we are trying, there is, like I said, there's blood vessels, white blood cells, red blood cells in poop. So when we do these fecal transplant, we're not, especially when physicians do it, there is a stool bank, University of Minnesota, Alex Garutz, and he's pretty good at, extracting the microbes only to make it, just the microbes that we're giving to the patients.
Yeah.
And he's also very good at picking his donors. So for those people who do not have a microbiome, a sibling or a family member that can donate, or even a friend or a spouse or whatever, then you can go to these stool banks. They're available. So to me, the world, the past. So to answer your question back about mental illness, yes, we did discover a signature microbiome in mental illness, but also we're starting to do, there's going to be a lot of work being done on fecal transplant and mental illness.
Yeah. Now, there's a lot of animals out there. I've had dogs over the years that will eat their own shit, basically. And, I don't know whether it's the fact that they can smell the food that they've eaten within it, or whether these animals are so more in tune with their body that they know what they need. Is this a distinct possibility that they are eating the?
So there's an interesting, if you talk to farmers who own like cows and chickens, they'll tell you the chickens will go when they're deprived. And I used to have chickens in my backyard, and I can tell you they would, go towards the poop of other animals, right, in the
Yeah.
backyard. And here's the thing, the chickens will go to the cow poop. But here's an interesting finding. They will not touch the cow poop if the cows have been vaccinated or got antibiotics. And I think it's because they probably know that
Yeah.
there's something, it's not the same smell, right?
Yeah.
And there is a smell to poop of quality versus not quality, right? I mean, you go, you smell these smells that are like just toxic, putrefied, right? That's bacteria. That's toxic bacteria you're smelling.
Yeah.
So typically, if you don't really have a smelly poop, you're probably in balance. But so probably the vaccination, the antibiotics killed off some good microbes, which intensified the bad microbes.
Yeah.
And essentially, that's probably what the chickens are smelling. And they're like, oh, not touching that. I'm going. But they go to the poop of the animals to get the microbes that they're lacking.
Very
And
good.
then you start seeing them like more energetic, etc.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and you see like the animal kingdom, like you'll see, like if a chicken is stressed, if it's cooped up, right? And I think that's where the term cooped up is.
Yeah.
They start bickering at each other. They start fighting with each other. They start losing feathers,
Yeah.
you know. And then you open the coop, all of a sudden you let them out, and they're eating dirt, and they're eating, and then all of a sudden their feathers grow back, and they're happy again.
Yeah.
So humans need to be out there. Humans need to go hike. Humans need to go to the beach. The stupidity they did during the pandemic from politicians
Yes.
was closing the beach. I mean, why are you closing the beach in Malibu? I mean, it's like 13 miles of sand and beach.
Yeah.
Just separate baby people, just put like 100 people in one area and then another 100, whatever. But you're in the sand, the water is salty. What do you have to worry about a virus when you're outside? And first of all, it's very difficult to spread a virus when you have a wind that's going by you, right? So,
And that's it. I imagine the defense of the body, the buildup of the bacteria that's needed to recharge the body, give the body something to work with. Those lockdowns, where people were, told they
yes.
couldn't leave the homes and go anywhere. That again must have been something that has probably accelerated illness in many, many people out there.
And cause depression and cause anxiety, and older people need the life of young people.
Yeah.
I see it with my own parents. They need their kids around them. They need their grandchildren. You see life when you have like that mixture of the two generations.
Yeah, absolutely. What breakthroughs has there been with cancer treatments within your field of work?
Well, breakthrough. I mean, I did a case of fecal transplant on a patient with metastatic mesothelioma, which extended her life significantly. But then somebody gave her antibiotics and killed everything I gave her. But that was the first breakthrough. I'm hoping that there's a lot of breakthrough with fecal transplant in patients that have radiation-induced colitis has helped them. The work of Dr. Mimi Wang at MD Anderson. That's going to be the future. I think we're going to start looking at, microbes and replenishing of microbes while we're killing with the chemo. Think about what is the chemo doing? It's killing the tumor, but then the tumor is shedding as this overload of tumor that's just going through your system.
Yeah.
You're killing the gut at the same time as you're killing the tumor. So you need to boost your immunity. You need your gut health.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Clostridium difficile, or C. diff as many know it, is something that millions of people around the world can suffer with. Have you found any solutions for this?
Fecal transplant, and I think the guidelines just came out that even as a prevention to cases who have had C. diff in the past, it may not be a bad idea to give them fecal transplant. So to me, look, I find C. diff is the number, we've shown that if you give vancomycin flagyl, you just keep depleting the microbiome.
Yeah.
What we need is essentially to regrow the microbiome with an implant. And so that's what implantation does, is it gives you a new garden, a new microbiome that you hope implants. We published a paper showing engraftment, successful engraftment post-fecal transplant. We showed that 2 of the patients engraft and were perfectly growing. However, 1 patient didn't respond and we had to find another donor. So the future is going to be about this matching concept, who's engrafting and who's not engrafting. What is interesting about C. diff, I mean, in my case, I've done, a lot of fecal transplants and I've had 99% success with C. diff. I think I had 1 patient who didn't respond. And came to find out, I basically found out that the donor that I picked was his wife, and they weren't really a good marriage to begin with.
Yeah.
And so for some reason, he didn't respond to his wife's microbiome. But then I gave him a super donor from University of Minnesota, and he responded, and it was actually miraculous because his psoriasis improved, his chronic UTI improved. He was no longer suicidal. He was craving orange juice, which was the same as the donor. So for that kid, and to this day, like I see him and the wife, and they're so happy. This guy was suicidal when I saw him. I mean, like every time I would see him in clinic, he was just miserable. He's like, "Doc, I'm just gonna shoot myself." And I'm like, "Okay, well, let's try this donor." And so finally it worked, and thank God he had. But here's the interesting thing about this case, because we didn't have the technology that we have now. We had PCR with C. diff. I think I did 11 stool PCR testing for C. diff, and I found it on the 12th one because I was so desperate to give this guy fecal transplant, and sure enough, he ended up having C. diff. We just couldn't pick it up on the regular PCR, probably because it was high up in the colon or something.
Yeah.
So here's a case of, because PCR is just a small portion of the bacteria or the virus. So you could easily miss it. So here's a case that it just changed his life. But, with fecal transplant, we've also noticed different things, like my case of Alzheimer's. You were talking about mental health before. Yeah. It's not necessarily mental health, but Alzheimer's. I gave him his wife's microbiome and he remembered his daughter's date of birth. So that is the future, right? So here's the future. The idea of playing with poop is not really my thing, right? I mean, I do it. I saw improvement in Alzheimer's. I saw improvement in 1 case of autism. Dr. Colleen Kelly saw 2 cases of alopecia areata. Dr. Barodi's done Parkinson's. He's seen some improvement. I've seen some improvement with arthritis in all those people who had C. diff. So we had a couple breakthrough cases. But here's the thing: the same thing that improves arthritis can cause arthritis. The same thing that can improve cancer can cause cancer. Same thing that can improve alopecia areata can cause alopecia areata. So I think the donor, the importance, and this is why my work is so important, the importance of getting a discovery on what these microbes are doing and what are they? What is it when I find new bacteria in you? Does that mean that you bacteria is making you intelligent? Does it mean that it's causing problems with indigestion? Does it cause pancreatitis? Does it cause celiac splea? What is it that those microbes are doing?
Yeah.
And here's the challenge. It's not just one microbe. We looked at Crohn's disease. Well, Crohn's disease in some people is a bacteria called Malassezia furfur that was found at Cedars-Sinai, right? And then in some people, it's Mycobacteria paratuberculosis, which Dr. Barodi has been a huge believer of, right? So it's not necessarily one bug per disease. It may just be multiple bugs for multiple diseases, for the same disease. I mean, multiple bugs for the same disease. So it is going to be an interesting dictionary to report on, but it is a dictionary that's needed because here's the problem. In the future, when we have the technology to know the genetic sequence of a patient, and we're going to give it to another patient, that patient needs to know the risk of all of the poop, right?
Yeah.
He needs to know, what am I swapping? I'm swapping C. diff. Well, C. diff is one case where like you're dying, so it doesn't really matter, right? You're dying. So whatever you get from C. diff, it gives you another year or two. You are dying anyways. So might as well stop the diarrhea and give you a new microbiome, okay? But I'm looking at conditions like irritable bowel syndrome, right? Am I swapping my irritable bowel syndrome for possibly loss of hair or possibly cancer? Am I swapping my celiac sprue where I've managed to stay off gluten my whole life for, hey, and by the way, I'm not celiac sprue, but I'm just saying, am I swapping that for, something else, psoriasis or arthritis?
Yeah.
So I think there's going to be a time where we are doing this. That's my job, right? My job is to push that glass ceiling, to push the science, to push the scientists, the doctors to see further than like, yeah, it's helping this patient right now. But what about 10 years from now? Did we shorten the lifespan of that patient, right?
Yeah.
In giving a new microbiome in a patient that is predisposed to Alzheimer's, am I speeding up the process of Alzheimer, of death, by giving him a new microbiome that he cannot sustain because his genetic code is XYZ, right? So, I think I learned early on in medicine, we have a time clock. And I think ultimately that time clock is going to stop. Are we speeding up the time clock by doing a fecal transplant to make them better, right? Are we speeding up the time clock when we're putting in a chip in our brain, right? So with every discovery, there's a side effect to it. And we need to be able to talk about it, right? So, and to go back to the vaccines, yes, maybe there's a lot of people that were protected from the vaccine, right? Maybe the overweight, the diabetic, the older folks, that didn't catch COVID, still vaccinated every time. Maybe to that person, the vaccine worked for them and they're fine. But here's the thing. Did it work for a year? Are they eventually going to catch something on the 6th, 7th vaccine? Are they dependent on a vaccination every 3 months? I can tell you that's not a life for me. No. If I had to be reminded every day, that every month, oh, it's time for my shot, that's not a life. I mean, you want to be free. You want to take the risks you take on your body because it's your risk, your life. Nobody should impose what you should be putting in your body. here we have like, society goes crazy about my body, my choice with women. And here we are, there's no choice. What happened to my body, my choice with a shot?
Yeah.
What happened to my body, my choice if I don't want to take this pill? Where you're going to force me to take a pill? It's my choice. I'm okay to die if I don't take this pill, right? So I think that, and here's the thing too. I mean, the stupidity of interfering with research. Nobody's going to escape death. Here we have an ability to look at the microbiome to possibly extend life safely without shortening it, right?
Yeah.
But we need to look at the other side. We need to look at, yes, the positive. Oh my God, this patient that's suicidal is fine now. But what if, I give him the wrong donor and I killed him, right? You have to look at both sides, and you have to make an informed consent, and it's your decision to make, nobody else's. The government has no right in the office between me and my patient. Nobody has a right to interfere between me and my patient, because if the government wants to interfere with me and my patient, then the government should be taking care of my patients. And believe me, I've got a ton of autistic children whose moms are just beyond exhausted, that are like, knocking at our doors, calling. I'm going to start telling them to call the government, call the FDA. Don't ask me. I don't know why my protocol's not approved.
Yeah.
There's tons of people with cancer, tons of people with Alzheimer's. Does the government want to start taking care of these patients? Perhaps President Biden can take care of them, right? Or Trump, or whoever is running, right? I don't think so. So the moment you gave me that responsibility as a physician, and you said, here's a medical license, here's a bunch of diplomas that says you're a doctor, that's the moment you said, you know what, doctor, it's between you and your patient. We don't need to be in this. So technically, if it's between me and my patient and I gave informed consent to the patient, I should be allowed to practice the art of medicine, because that's what it is. It's an art.
Absolutely. And for people as well, sometimes the quality of life is far more important than the quantity of life. Do you think?
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, if I was wheelchair bound, I mean, I wouldn't want to live. This is not, my life is gardening, my life is fishing, my life is skiing. That's life to me. What quality of life do you have when you're like bedridden or in an intubator or wheelchair bound, right? But again, that's a choice, because you have other people that are religious that say, no, I gotta stay alive, even if I'm on an intubator, because my religious belief, I cannot kill myself, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, I'm not saying one way or another how I would decide. I'm not in that position yet, thank God. But here's the thing. We have to start thinking. We have to be proactive and start thinking, what if I am in this position, right? The single most reason that I opened Progenibiome, which really, when I started it, and it's kind of funny because it's on my logo, it says the quest for a healthcare revolution.
Yeah.
I started it with the interest of knowing what is going on in Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, autism, because what if my grandchild is autistic? What if myself, I become Parkinson's, or I have Alzheimer's and I can't remember my grandchildren's names, Yeah. I don't want to be saying I coulda, shoulda, woulda. I look back at my life and I could have started looking into the microbiome and I didn't. And I don't care if you're Bill Gates or President Biden or Trump, everybody is human and everybody's going to die. We are trying to extend life as much as possible, and we cannot interfere with research, because the problem is when you are the patient, it's going to affect you. Yeah. And that's research was interfered with during the pandemic.
Yeah. Do you think that the future of the work that you're doing and the research is going to get to a level where you're going to be able to screen donors to a level where you can get a really good match without any possibility of side effects? And at that point, is the need for donors going to be very similar to the need for blood donors?
Yes, and my fear is because of the vaccination for COVID that we've done to humanity, my fear is we're not going to find so many donors.
Yeah,
And COVID and the manipulation of bugs.
yeah,
My fear is we're going to have a lack of donors. I'm already having a hard time finding donors, I'll be honest. We did stool sample between COVID, in the stools, between, E. coli, vancomycin resistant E. coli, between C. diff, between all that. There's so many people carrying all these bugs. Doesn't make them a good donor. On top of that, you add an obese person and the risk of causing obesity by giving an obese microbiome to a skinny person, and or anxiety microbiome, which we've seen that patients with post-transplant have had anxiety from their fecal transplant. So I'm worried about a lack of, and therefore if there's a lack of, the supply becomes really expensive. I can tell you that my people that are non-vaccinated, have not gotten COVID, are super resilient, super amazing microbiome. These people want a lot of money for their poop because they have to travel. It's fresh poop,
yeah.
and they're like, why should I did everything right. My poop is worth something, right? So the value of that microbiome, think about the pharmaceutical company is selling like capsules of poop for $10,000.
What?
$10,000 for poop. Okay. So donors can name their prices at this point if you're a good donor. So, it's going to be supply and demand in that. So it would be best. And it's kind of, I was in Africa and some guy just said, how much are you going to give me for my poop, Dr. Hazan? I'm like, what tells me your poop is good? Right. I don't know. I don't have a magic lens. I got to look at it. So here's the thing. The problem is with testing of that quality, it's very expensive. It's in the thousands. So you got to test for toxic bacteria. You got to test for, viruses. You got to test for COVID now. So it's very expensive to test a donor. And just because they're quote unquote healthy does not make a golden microbiome. A golden microbiome is really, it's someone that can achieve improvement in another patient and allow engraftment. And in my opinion, and I'm too early to say this, there's going to be a compatibility factor. So
Definitely. This has been.
But by the way, what a beautiful world if, and I'm going to finish on this, if your perceived enemy was the one that was meant to save you, right?
It's funny, isn't it? Yeah,
Imagine.
all this divide that we see around the world, and in reality, the likelihood is we can heal each other.
Yeah, and I think if you look at two countries that are fighting each other, maybe one country has certain microbes that the other country needs, and maybe the interchange of those microbes to that country and vice versa, brings the peace and the balance in the human beings and in the country. The secret to longevity in life is really a peaceful microbiome.
Yeah.
If your microbiome is you're creating chaos and you're stressed and it's like taking a bottle and shaking it all the time. You're going to have a lot of gas and bubbles in there. But if you leave the bottle steady, there's no gas, no bubbles, it's steady, it's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
I think it's the same thing in the microbiome. Turbulence does not allow implantation or growth and diversity. And it creates turbulence personality. It creates anxiety. It creates, disease process, dysbiosis, leaky gut, diseases come in. So I think it is all about missing microbes, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So those that we perceive as our enemies could be holding the key to what we need to survive ourselves.
Yeah, it got me thinking there. You're talking about obviously people, possibly having the cure for each other and fighting each other. And, with the anxiety that you mentioned as well, looking back throughout my life, and anyone can probably, just picture the same as what I'm thinking right now. We have been around the world in a perpetual fear propaganda machine, a perpetual state of war moving forward. Do you think fear, and obviously the last 4 years has been probably one of the biggest fear campaigns I've ever seen, do you think fear can really affect people's gut and cause
100%.
sickness?
Yes, 100%.
Yeah,
So, and we're going to start showing it in the data as well, but there is such a thing, like people with PTSD,
yeah,
fear, stress, anxiety, that you have zero bifidobacteria.
yeah,
So how can you survive, viruses out there? Think about a plant, a pepper has viruses. You're eating that pepper, raw, you're eating a bunch of viruses.
yeah,
Are you going to survive those viruses, right? Are you going to survive tomato rugae virus? Are you going to survive, a pepper mold virus, that's found on a pepper? So, this is the reality. You have to kind of calm down the system and stop the fear and stop the propaganda.
yeah,
Look, what is there to be fearful of? I mean, we're all going to die, accept it, and live your life today.
yeah.
That's it.
Turn
Live
your, turn
live
your
today.
TV off.
What?
Turn your TV off. That's probably the best advice.
My mom, she's in a perpetual state of anxiety, and I keep telling her, Mom, turn off the TV, turn
Yeah,
off CNN, turn off Fox. You don't need to hear about it. It's not. Yes, we can feel with our hearts that there are people fighting out there, but unfortunately, what can we do? There's only so many battles we can take on, right?
yeah,
People talk to me about like what's going on in the Middle East and what's going on in Israel and what's going on in Russia, Ukraine. I'm like, look, I'm focusing on the microbiome right now. And
yeah,
I'm focusing at trying to find a cure for kids with autism, which every single person, Palestinians, Israelis, Russians, Ukraine, have kids with autism.
yeah,
Let me focus on that, okay? And here's the other thing, because people try to, exacerbate the fear porn, I like to call it, right?
yeah,
And I always say the microbiome of humanity is going extinct. We have bigger problems than you two bickering about like land or money or whatever. You know, Humanity is going extinct and I'm going to finish with this. In the last 6,000 samples, in the last 1,000 samples I've done in the last 6 months, less than 5% had bifidobacteria and one patient had lactobacillus.
yeah,
How can you absorb sugar or dairy if you don't have those microbes in there? You know what I mean? Sugar and calcium is needed for Krebs cycle, for mitochondria.
yeah,
So now, think 100 years from now. What are we going to have? Zero BIF and zero lactobacillus?
yeah,
I mean, what is that lack of bifidobacteria doing to the planet, right? Because here's the thing we found out. There's great data out there that bifidobacteria decomposes plastic.
really?
Yes. So is the fact that we have, so much plastic, or we're even like drinking bottles. We've always had water bottles as kids. We never had, findings of microscopic plastic in our stools, right? Only recently is it correlated because of the fact that there's a loss of bifidobacteria.
Yeah,
And is that loss of bifidobacteria going to the planet and affecting the overall bifidobacteria of the planet? And is that essentially the cause of, earth instability, imbalance? What we do as a race, as humanity, affects the planet. Our bodies, our poop gets decomposed into the earth. The balance of the microbiome of the planet, not just one country, the planet is out of balance. And therefore, cracks occur, viruses occur, overaccumulation of certain microbes that are secreting, methane are being produced, and the planet takes a different shape, and eventually it's going to disappear. But I have a feeling humanity is going to disappear before the planet, because
Very
we
likely.
see during the fires, everything burns, but then guess what? Mother Earth comes back right after. But all the material things burn. So, we have to pay attention, and we have to respect Mother Earth, and we have to respect the planet, and we have to respect the diversity of humanity, and stop believing that we're all the same, when we're not. We're all beautiful and different, and it's okay. It's okay, because we all have different jobs. Not everybody could be a singer, not everybody could be a musician, not everybody could be a shit stirrer like me. So, we gotta, it's okay. We need a Sabine, and we need you, and we need, a Biden, and we need a Trump, and we need a Bill Gates, and but together we need to keep that balance, so that it's not one overshadowing another, but everybody together. And on that, kumbaya.
Yeah. One more thing, and I promise it'll be the last question, because as we're talking, things are just popping up all the time.
Sure.
You mentioned there about, obviously, one of the major things that you're dealing with is the autism within children, which is at such a high percentage now. It's beyond ignoring for most people. Obviously, the links to the bacteria within the stomach, in the gut, sorry, that is possibly linked to this. Would it be fair to say that the lack of this within the gut to help the healing and keep people healthy could very possibly be something to do with the vaccine regime throughout the years that children have been forced upon them, and it's just caused so much damage?
I think vaccines have changed, right? I think vaccines when we were little were different concept. Even the, Pasteur, when he started off the concept of vaccine, that was a piece of a bug that you basically inoculate the person, and then they develop, it's a small amount, and then they develop an immune response, and then they can fight that bug, and they recognize it, right? We are no longer in that world of a small bug. We are now, the vaccines themselves have a lot of what I like to call junk, right? Much like the foods, much like the vitamins, much like the probiotics.
Yeah.
I work with a woman that does probiotics, that creates probiotics, and I'm like, I just want this strain, this strain, this strain, and she gave me the strain, but then she, and it didn't, I didn't see it grow on my patient. I'm like, I don't understand. You gave me all those strains. What else did you put in there, right? And she goes, well, I put XYZ. I'm like, oh my God, why did you put XYZ? I just wanted the strain, right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing with vitamins, right? There's so much junk in vitamins that they put in, right? That it destroys the vitamins. So, and then there's contamination on top of that.
Yeah.
So if I want vitamin C, if I have pure vitamin C, yeah, it's going to do what it's supposed to do, which is increase the bifidobacteria.
Yeah.
But if it's got vitamin C and it's got a little bit of arsenic because it's contaminated by some whatever, or copper, because the pipes are old and the factory didn't replace the pipes properly and nobody's supervising, and now I'm getting this white capsule that actually has some metals in there, and I'm swallowing that. Well, that's not going to be very good for my microbiome, right? So unfortunately, so the concept that we started with vaccines was good. Remember, I do clinical trials, and I brought vaccines to market. I did clinical trials on vaccines, okay?
Yeah.
So vaccines are not necessarily a bad thing. It's the technology and the crap we put in the vaccines that is bad. It is also this new technology of messenger RNA, I'm sorry, is not a vaccine. No. It's a sequence. So if it's a sequence, it's not a vaccine. Why are you calling this a vaccine? It's a new technology. And this new technology has not been shown. I mean, they've been doing studies for years and it never got out. And then all of a sudden COVID hits and they're like, everybody needs to be vaccinated with this new technology. Well, that was the first, red flag for me. Yeah. Because I said, what do you mean? You put it in 6 monkeys, you killed them in 1 week. You notice that two of the monkeys had some lung issues, and you determine, oh, well, you know what, the placebo arm had COVID, and therefore, because they exposed the monkeys to COVID, and therefore the vaccinated arm didn't have COVID, and they're fine. So we're going to move to phase 1 with adults. No, that's not an animal study. First of all, why did you kill the monkeys? Why did you kill the monkeys, right? And where was the animal, police there? Why did you kill the monkeys in 1 week? Why didn't you have another group of animals that you could just follow, right? Why didn't you do the animal studies at the same time as you were in a rush, right? Why didn't you do the animal study at the same time as you did the humans and follow the animal studies to see what was going on there? So the research was very poorly done. And then as they went on to phase 1, and then as they went on further in their clinical trials, it was basically, well, because, COVID is a pandemic and we got to vaccinate everyone, let's just give the placebo arm the vaccine as well. So now you've completely messed up your whole experiment because you no longer have a control group. That was the second red flag. It's just, there was so many and then stopping treatment and censoring voices of doctors doing it. Listen, I've been in the clinical trials for almost 3 decades, putting trials to market, including vaccination trials, okay? I'm in this field as an independent research center, non-academia, because I have the luxury to say, no, this drug is crap and should never go to market. And then I can make my phone call to the FDA and say, by the way, this drug caused this guy to spit up blood, and I just want to warn you about it because that's my job. I took the oath, and I also follow ICH-GCP guidelines, which is what we all follow as doctors that do clinical trials. Yeah. The moment they change those rules, and it's no longer, and I can't call to say, hey, I have a patient that died 4 days after the vaccine, and you don't even care about it, and you don't investigate, that's a problem. Yeah. So, and the moment that we are not asked all these serious side effects, that was a problem. The moment you tell people, well, listen, you can have your donut and a vaccine, when we should be promoting health, that's a problem. But it's a joke, right? I mean, like television, the media, it's a joke. I mean, showing a commercial of couch potatoes at the Super Bowl, or Matt Damon and Ben Affleck with singing their Dunkin' Donuts song to promote people to eat Dunkin' Donuts and make America fatter, as if it doesn't have already a problem. I've never seen evil in the face. That's the best way to say it, right? I've never seen. We should be human beings to say, wait a minute, my actions are going to trigger. Yeah, it was funny. Matt Damon and Ben Affleck are funny doing, their commercial and singing and dancing or whatever. But their responsibility, what responsibility do they have? Influencing kids to start eating donuts so they could become diabetic later? Is that something to be proud of? Is that why they're in that stage? Is that why God put them on stage, to make fools of themselves and promote people to eat donuts? It's disgusting. This is, and I have a problem with that, because if God gives you a stage, it's to do good, to help another human being. Because guess what? When you're the patient, who's going to help you? Yeah. Humanity is cold. We are seeing it. We've seen it with COVID. How many doctors stepped in to help patients? How many doctors treated? And how many doctors just said, I'm sorry, watch your oxygen. If you start dropping, then go to the emergency room. Hi, you're having an anaphylactic reaction. I'm just going to watch. I'm not going to give you epinephrine. I'm going to wait for the government to give you epinephrine, to tell me to give you epinephrine. Yeah. Where's the heart of humanity? Where is it? I'll tell you where it is. It's brainwashed by the amount of influence all around us, from our social media, from our phones to our television to our advertisement, everything we are being fed. And all that affects the brain, which affects our gut. So don't come tell me why you're anxious and why you're suicidal and why you're all this. Start looking at what you're doing that is affecting your gut. What are you doing that's creating that amount of anxiety? It's not a pill, because everybody says, well, what's the best probiotic to increase my bifidobacteria? It's not a pill. It's not.
No.
It's a pill with something, with stopping to eat the foods that are killing the bifidobacteria, with stopping to take the products that are killing the bifidobacteria, with stopping to fight with your husband or your parent or your kid that could possibly kill the bifidobacteria. It's stopping to drink that bottle of wine every night that is killing your bifidobacteria and sterilizing your microbiome. And then when you stop drinking, you start having all these problems because now you had a sterile gut and now you're no longer. And then you start saying, oh, well, and again, not to trash on Ben Affleck, but, I heard a podcast for him that said drug addiction is it's about anger. It's about being angry with ourselves, and we have to let go of the anger. And I just want to say, no, actually, it's a microbiome dysbiosis. You killed your microbiome. Now you're needing good microbes that you're getting from good nutrition. So, we have to be ethical. We have to be righteous. We have to be good, and we have to give back. And, to those guys, God bless them for their funny movies and everything that lights up and tells the story. But we have to do good and give back. This is our time. This is our moment to give back.
Absolutely.
This is a test, by the way. The whole COVID was a test.
Yeah, I do believe that, service to others is probably the greatest human calling that anybody can do. And I think more people realize that, we can start changing the world for the better moving forward. Now, if people want to find out more about your work and obviously as well, your Twitter feed as well, where can they find you? And
everything is on the Progena Biome website. So Progena, Progena-Biome, because Progena was created like from your genes to your microbiome, which is what causes the disease. Is it genetically or is it microbiome being passed on? Are we inheriting the genes? Or are we inheriting the microbes? That's yet to be determined. I personally think microbes play a huge role in disease. That's why I'm in this field. It was a huge breakthrough with COVID to look at the microbiome, to see loss of bifidobacteria in autism, in Lyme disease, in Crohn's disease, in invasive cancer. So this was a huge breakthrough. I hope we continue to have these breakthroughs. I think, in a way, this is God showing the miracles. When you see, I lost no one during the pandemic. I could have had one patient die, but I took care of hypoxic patients. I took care of politicians, senators, billionaires, farmers, actors, etc. during the pandemic, and no one died. Yeah. There's a God, and that's God showing his miracles. It's not because I'm such a good doctor. It's really because I'm not afraid. If you have faith in God and you're doing the right thing, God will open the door. The door was open to the microbiome. I see this vision of the microbiome. I need to see it through. This is, to me, is the most important thing that we need to start looking at. Where do we go after we die when our body decomposes? Where do these microbes go on to? Are they coming back? Are they carrying the soul? Are they moving to another life? This is so important. This is such important research that it cannot be interfered with. And it really needs, I'm constantly that painter that's trying to paint, a beautiful painting, and I'm constantly being pushed in every direction. And my painting is ending up into the zigzag everywhere. And I have to remind myself, okay, I got to make sure that it's beautiful, and do no harm, and speak the truth, and all that. We're all here for a short period of time. and we got to do what's right. And we got to stop with the fights and the wars. And this is a beautiful opportunity to see the microbiome, to see our inner, what are we carrying in that mini universe? Here, Elon Musk is taking us to like the moon and, possibly Mars. What's living in our gut? Shouldn't we want to know about this?
Yeah.
So, our lab identified where Mars is in the gut. We want to keep doing this. We want to keep seeing the secrets of life and the mysteries of life in the microbiome.
Absolutely. Couldn't think of a better time to end on there. Dr. Sabine Hazan, this has been an absolute incredible conversation. I hope a lot of people get as much as I've got out of this and share it. Let other people hear what we've talked about here today. And hopefully we'll change the world one person at a time, and we'll get there in the end. Thank you very much indeed for
Thank you so
talking to
much.
us today. No, it's been incredible.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.